Hey there. Have you ever dreamed of speaking English fluently, confidently, and without hesitation? I know. It sounds amazing, right? Well, guess what? We're going to make that dream a reality. Together, we'll explore simple, powerful ways to master English, one step at a time. Trust me, it's easier than you think, and you're not alone in this journey. So grab a cup of tea, relax, and let's dive into this ultimate guide to English fluency. Are you ready? Let's do this. Chapter 1. The Power of Listening. Your first step to fluency. When I started learning a new language, I didn't know where to begin. I thought the key to speaking was just speaking, but I quickly realized that listening was the foundation of everything. Let me tell you a little about how listening completely transformed the way I learned and how it can do the same for you. I remember the first time I tried to listen to native speakers. It felt impossible. They spoke so fast, and I couldn't understand half of what they were saying. But instead of giving up, I made listening a part of my daily life. I started small. At first, I just listened to songs. Music was fun, and I didn't feel like I was studying. I picked songs with simple lyrics, and even if I didn't understand the words, I kept listening. Over time, I started picking up phrases and words, and then I'd sing along. It wasn't perfect, but it helped me get used to the rhythm of the language. One thing I did was watch movies with subtitles. I remember watching the same movie twice. Once with subtitles in my language, and then again with English subtitles. It was like a game, matching the sounds to the words. And honestly, it was a game changer. I started noticing patterns in how sentences were formed and how words were pronounced. It was like unlocking a secret code. Podcasts became my best friend. I found some that were made for language learners, where the speakers talked slower than usual. I'd put on my headphones while walking or doing chores, and I'd just listen. At first, I didn't understand everything, but that didn't matter. I just let the words flow into my brain. And the more I listened, the more things started to make sense. It's like when you hear a song for the first time. You might not catch all the lyrics, but after a few listens, the words become clear. Another thing that really helped was shadowing. It's when you listen to something and then repeat it immediately, trying to mimic the speaker. I remember sitting in my room, listening to an interview, and pausing after every sentence to repeat what they said. I tried to copy their tone, their rhythm, even their emotions. It felt a bit awkward at first, but it was so effective. It was like training my mouth and ears to work together. Let me tell you a funny story. I used to listen to news reports in English while cooking. At first, I barely understood what they were talking about. But then, I started hearing words I recognized. Words like weather, today, and sports. It was exciting, like I was solving a puzzle. Slowly, I began to understand full sentences, and before I knew it, I was able to follow the whole report. One thing I learned is that it's important to listen to a variety of voices. Different people have different accents, speeds, and ways of talking. I made sure to listen to everything I could find: interviews, audiobooks, YouTube videos, and even random conversations. Each one taught me something new. It's like training your ears to handle anything that comes their way. You know what else worked for me? Listening to stories. Stories are so engaging that you don't even realize you're learning. I'd find short stories in English with audio, and I'd listen while reading along. If I didn't know a word, I'd look it up, but the key was to focus on the story itself. The more I enjoyed it, the more I wanted to keep going. And because I was having fun, I didn't feel like I was studying at all. I also learned to be patient with myself. There were times when I got frustrated because I couldn't understand everything. But then I reminded myself that it's okay. Understanding doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. Even when you don't understand, your brain is still absorbing the language. It's like planting seeds. You don't see the results immediately, but they're growing beneath the surface. Making listening a habit was the best decision I made. I started small, just a few minutes a day, and then increased the time as I got more comfortable. Some days, I'd listen to a podcast while jogging. Other days, I'd watch a TV show before bed. And sometimes, I'd just put on background music in English while working. It didn't matter what I was doing. As long as I was listening, I was learning. And here's something fun I did. I'd record myself speaking. I'd listen to a short clip, pause it, and then repeat what I heard while recording myself. Then I'd play it back to see how close I was to the original. It was like having my own little practice session. At first, I felt shy hearing my own voice, but I got over it because it helped me improve so much. One of the best moments for me was when I realized I didn't need subtitles anymore. It didn't happen suddenly, but one day, I was watching a show and I noticed I was understanding everything without even glancing at the subtitles. It felt like a huge achievement, like all the hard work had paid off. And you know what? That can happen for you too. Listening is such a powerful tool, and the best part is, it's something you can do anywhere, anytime. Whether you're cooking, cleaning, walking, or just relaxing, you can always find a way to listen to English. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be stressful. Just make it a part of your everyday life, and you'll see how much it helps. Keep going, and trust me, you'll get there. Chapter 2: Think in English. Changing your mindset. Thinking in English is like unlocking a whole new way of learning. I know it sounds difficult at first. I used to think the same way. How can I think in a language I don't know well? But let me tell you, once you start trying, it's a game changer. It's not about perfection. It's about practice and consistency. When I started learning a new language, I used to translate everything in my head. I'd hear something in English, then quickly translate it into my native language. It worked for a while, but it was slow, and I'd get stuck when I couldn't find the right word. That's when I realized, to really improve, I had to think directly in English. It was hard in the beginning, but I found small ways to practice, and those small steps made a big difference. I remember the first thing I tried was naming objects around me in English. I'd look at my phone and think, phone. I'd see a chair and think, chair. It was simple, but it got my brain used to associating English words with things I saw every day. Over time, I didn't need to translate in my head because those words became automatic. One thing I found super helpful was describing my day to myself in English. For example, in the morning, I'd think, I am brushing my teeth. Now I am having breakfast. I'm going to work. It might sound silly, but it works. You don't need to say out loud. Just think it. The more I practiced this, the easier it became to think in English without even realizing it. Another trick I used was talking to myself. I know it sounds a little strange, but trust me, it's one of the best ways to practice. When I was alone, I'd ask myself questions and answer them. For example, I'd say, what do I want to eat today? Maybe pasta. Or maybe I'll make a sandwich. It felt like having a little conversation with myself, and it helped me build confidence. I also started imagining conversations in English. If I knew I had to talk to someone in English later, I'd rehearse what I wanted to say in my head. For example, if I was going to order food, I'd think, okay, I'll say, "Can I have a sandwich, please?" I'd practice different ways the conversation might go, and it made me feel more prepared. Sometimes I'd even imagine I was explaining something to someone, like how to cook a dish or how to fix something. I'd picture myself teaching someone step by step in English. It was a fun way to practice, and it really helped me think faster in English. Listening also played a big role. When I listened to English songs or podcasts, I'd try to focus on the meaning without translating. I'd let the words flow and try to think in English while listening. For example, if I heard the phrase, "It's a beautiful day," I'd picture the day in my mind instead of translating it. It was like creating a direct connection between English and my thoughts. One thing that really helped me was writing in English. I started keeping a small journal where I'd write about my day, my thoughts, or even things I was grateful for. At first, I used simple sentences like, "Today was a good day. I went to the park." But as I got more comfortable, I started writing more detailed thoughts. It was like practicing thinking in English on paper. I also tried to surround myself with English as much as possible. I changed the language on my phone and apps to English. At first, it felt strange, but it forced me to think in English every time I used my phone. I also labeled things in my room with sticky notes. For example, I'd put a note that said window on my window or mirror on my mirror. Every time I looked at those things, I'd think of the English word. You know what else helped? Playing games. I loved word games like crossword puzzles or word searches in English. They were fun, and they made me think in English without feeling like I was studying. Sometimes I'd play games where I had to describe something in English without using the actual word, like saying, "It's a thing you use to write," instead of just saying, "pen." It was challenging, but it was also a great way to practice thinking in English. I remember one day, I was sitting in a park, just watching people. I started thinking in English about what I saw. I thought, "That woman is walking her dog. The kids are playing on the swings. The sky is so blue today." It was such a simple exercise, but it helped me a lot. It made me realize that thinking in English doesn't have to be complicated. It's about observing and describing the world around you. Sometimes I'd challenge myself to think in English for a set amount of time. For example, I'd decide that for the next 10 minutes, I'd only think in English. If I didn't know a word, I'd try to describe it in another way. For example, if I couldn't think of the word bottle, I'd think, "It's the thing you use to hold water." It was like a mental workout, and it helped me get better at expressing myself. One day, I realized I was starting to dream in English. It wasn't every night, but it happened more and more often. That's when I knew my brain was getting used to thinking in English. It felt like a big milestone, and it motivated me to keep going. Thinking in English is like building a habit. It takes time and effort, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Don't worry about making mistakes or not knowing every word. The important thing is to keep practicing and to be patient with yourself. It's all about progress, not perfection. And trust me, the more you practice thinking in English, the more natural it will feel. Keep going, and you'll be amazed at how far you can come. Chapter 3: Speaking Without Fear. Building Confidence in English. Speaking without fear is one of the biggest challenges when learning English. I understand how it feels because I've been there too. There's this constant worry of making mistakes, sounding silly, or being judged. But let me tell you something that changed everything for me. Mistakes are not the enemy. Fear is. The only way to build confidence in English is to take that first step, even if you're scared. When I first started speaking in a new language, I used to overthink every word before I said it. I would think, what if I use the wrong word? What if people laugh at my pronunciations? And because of that, I stayed quiet most of the time. But one day, I realized that if I didn't try, I would never improve. So, I started small. I didn't push myself to give long speeches or have deep conversations. I began with simple sentences, like greeting someone or ordering food. The first few times were hard. My hands would sweat, and my voice would shake. But I did it anyway. And guess what? Nobody laughed. In fact, most people were kind and supportive. I learned that people don't expect perfection. They appreciate effort. This helped me relax a little and focus more on communicating rather than trying to sound perfect. One of the things I did was practice speaking to myself. I would stand in front of a mirror and talk about my day or pretend to have a conversation. For example, I'd say, "Hi, how are you?" "I'm good. Thank you." "Today, I went to the park." It felt weird at first, but it helped me get used to hearing my own voice in English. Another thing I did was record myself speaking. I would choose a topic, like my favorite movie or a place I wanted to visit, and just talk. Then I'd listen to the recording. At first, it was painful to hear my mistakes, but I used it as a learning tool. I'd notice where I hesitated or mispronounced a word, and I'd try to improve the next time. It was like having my own personal coach. One of my favorite ways to practice speaking was through singing. I love music, and I found that singing along to English songs was a fun and low-pressure way to practice pronunciation and rhythm. Songs are great because they stick in your mind, and they help you get used to the natural flow of the language. I'd pick songs with clear lyrics and sing along, even if I didn't get every word right. Over time, I noticed my pronunciation improved, and I felt more confident speaking because I was used to the sounds of English. I also started using apps and online platforms to connect with people who were learning English or who were native speakers. It was amazing to talk to people from different parts of the world. I remember my first conversation with a native speaker. I was so nervous, but they were patient and encouraging. They didn't care about my mistakes. They were just happy to talk to someone who was trying to learn their language. That experience gave me so much confidence. One thing I learned is that speaking is like any other skill. The more you practice, the better you get. It's like riding a bike. At first, you might wobble or fall, but with time and practice, you find your balance. Speaking English is the same. You have to keep at it, even when it feels hard. I used to challenge myself to speak English every day, even if it was just for a few minutes. I'd talk to a colleague, call customer service, or ask a question at a store. The more I practiced, the less scary it became. And each time I succeeded, even in a small way, it boosted my confidence. One of the most important lessons I learned is to be kind to yourself. It's easy to feel frustrated when you make a mistake or can't find the right word, but remember that every mistake is an opportunity to learn. I once mispronounced a word in a meeting and everyone laughed, but not in a mean way. They corrected me and I laughed too. It became a funny story, and I never forgot how to say that word again. That moment taught me that it's okay to laugh at yourself, and that mistakes are just a part of the process. Another thing that helped me was focusing on what I could do rather than what I couldn't. Instead of worrying about not knowing advanced vocabulary, I celebrated the fact that I could introduce myself or hold a basic conversation. Confidence grows when you focus on progress, no matter how small. I also started watching videos and interviews in English, paying attention to how people spoke and expressed themselves. I noticed how they used their hands, their tone, and their expressions to communicate. It made me realize that speaking is not just about words. It's about connecting with the person you're talking to. That took a lot of pressure off because I didn't feel like I had to say everything perfectly. I just had to communicate. Over time, I learned to embrace my accent. At first, I wanted to sound like a native speaker, but then I realized that my accent is a part of who I am. It shows my journey and my effort to learn another language. Now, I see it as something to be proud of. I want you to know that building confidence in speaking English is a journey. There will be moments when it feels difficult, but those are the moments that help you grow the most. Start small, be consistent, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Speak to yourself, to others, to the mirror, or even to your pet. The more you speak, the more confident you will become. Just remember, every word you say in English is a step closer to fluency, and you're doing an amazing job by taking that step. Keep going, and you'll get there. Chapter 4. The Importance of Reading. Expand your vocabulary. Reading is one of the most powerful tools in learning any language, and it has definitely been one of my personal favorites when it comes to improving my English skills. You might be wondering, why is reading so important? Well, I'm here to tell you that reading not only helps you understand the structure of the language better, but it also introduces you to new words and phrases that you can use in real-life situations. It's like opening a door to an entire world of vocabulary that can make you sound more fluent and confident. When I started learning English, I remember feeling a bit overwhelmed by how much there was to learn. But reading became my escape, my secret weapon. I started with simple children's books, books that were easy to understand, but still interesting. The more I read, the more I noticed that I was picking up new words without even trying. For example, I remember reading a book about a young adventurer exploring the forest. I didn't know many of the words, like expedition, trail, and bivouac, but instead of looking up every single word, I tried to guess their meanings based on the context of the sentences. And it worked. Slowly, I started understanding more, and the new words I picked up became part of my vocabulary. You don't have to start with complicated novels or long articles. Start with material that interests you. Whether it's comics, news, short stories, or even song lyrics, reading things you enjoy will motivate you to continue. I remembered how reading a simple detective story got me hooked on English. The thrill of figuring out who committed the crime kept me reading, and with each page, I learned something new. One of the most amazing things about reading is how it helps you expand your vocabulary naturally. You might think it's a challenge at first, especially if you don't know many words in English, but as you keep reading, you'll find that your brain starts to make connections between words. The more words you read in different contexts, the easier it becomes to understand their meaning, even when you encounter them in conversations or other texts later. I had this one experience when I was reading a book on a topic I was really passionate about, technology. I didn't know many technical words, but the more I read, the more familiar they became. Eventually, I felt like I was becoming more comfortable with using them. Not only was I learning new words, but I was also learning how to use them in the right context. For instance, words like software, algorithm, and data seemed complicated at first, but after reading books and articles about the subject, I was able to use them in my conversations with others. It gave me a sense of pride to be able to talk about something in English that I really cared about. One of the key things I discovered was that reading in English doesn't have to be stressful. When I first started, I was very particular about understanding every single word. But now, I realize that it's okay if you don't know every word. The goal of reading is not to memorize everything, but to get a feel for how words are used, how sentences are structured, and how ideas flow. It's more about getting exposure to the language. Over time, you will begin to notice patterns in sentence structure and learn the meaning of new words simply by seeing them over and over in context. Another method I used to make the most out of my reading was to keep a vocabulary journal. Every time I encountered a new word, I would write it down, along with its meaning, and use it in a sentence. At first, it felt like a chore, but after a while, I started noticing that my vocabulary was growing faster than I had imagined. I even began to look forward to writing in my journal because I could see the progress I was making. And it's not just about reading books. Reading anything in English can help. I started reading newspapers and online articles, especially those related to topics I found interesting. The key is to make reading a daily habit. It doesn't matter if you're reading a short article, a tweet, or even a product description on a website. Every word you read counts, and over time, those words will add up. The best part, you don't need to read for hours every day. Even just 15 to 20 minutes of reading in the morning or before bed can help you expand your vocabulary. You can also use audiobooks to help you with pronunciation. Listening to the audiobook while following along with the text can improve both your vocabulary and your speaking skills. It's a great way to hear how words are pronounced and understand how they sound in different contexts. I found this method really helpful when I was trying to improve my accent. Hearing native speakers pronounce words correctly gave me the confidence to try saying them myself. When I started, I was very focused on learning big words to sound smarter. But as I read more, I realized that it's not about using difficult words. It's about using the right words in the right situations. Sometimes, simple words can have a bigger impact than complex ones. For example, I remember a time when I had to explain a technical problem to someone. Instead of using complicated jargon, I focused on explaining the issue in simple words that anyone could understand. That helped me build trust and made my explanation clear. As I continued to read, I started recognizing how much my vocabulary was growing. Not just individual words, but also phrases and expressions that are commonly used in everyday English. For example, phrases like "on the other hand," "as a result," or "in the long run" began to appear in the books I read. I started using these expressions in my own conversations, and it made me sound more natural. The beauty of reading is that you get to experience the language in all its forms. You encounter informal language, formal language, slang, idioms, and even cultural references that you might not come across in textbooks. This is what gives you the power to communicate more effectively in different situations. Whether you're talking to a friend, a colleague, or someone you just met, knowing when to use the right expression or phrase is what sets you apart as a fluent speaker. As I look back at my own journey, I realize how much reading has shaped my understanding of English. It helped me go beyond textbook learning and immerse myself in the language. Now I can read complex articles, watch English movies without subtitles, and have conversations in English with ease. And all of that started with reading simple books, articles, and anything else I could get my hands on. So, I encourage you to start reading today. Find something that excites you, something you enjoy, and read it in English. Remember, it's not about reading fast. It's about reading regularly. Start small, and soon you'll see how your vocabulary expands and how much more confident you'll become in your ability to speak English. And don't forget, reading is not a one-time thing. It's a lifelong habit that will keep helping you grow in the language. Keep reading, keep learning, and soon enough, you'll see just how much your vocabulary and fluency have improved. Chapter 5. Daily Practice Routines. Small steps, big results. When it comes to improving your English, one of the most important things I've learned is the value of consistency. It's not about doing one big thing in a single day. It's about making small, steady steps every day. I've personally experienced how daily practice can transform your skills, so I'm excited to share this with you. I remember when I first started learning English. I wanted to make quick progress, but I quickly realized that it wasn't a race. You don't need to spend hours at a time, but you do need to show up every day. I started by setting aside just 15 minutes a day to practice. It seemed so small at first, but what I didn't realize was that those 15 minutes added up over time, and before I knew it, I had made so much progress. One of the things that really helped me get started with a daily practice routine was breaking it down into bite-sized activities. Instead of saying, "I'm going to learn English today," I would say, "I'm going to listen to a podcast in English," or "I'm going to read an article in English." That made it feel more manageable, and I found myself sticking to the routine because I could see it was achievable. Small, consistent actions were the key to making steady progress. I also found that having a routine made it easier to keep track of what I was doing. At first, I was just trying random things. Some days I would practice speaking, other days I would focus on vocabulary, and sometimes I would watch movies in English. But after a while, I started to feel a bit lost because I didn't have a clear structure. That's when I decided to create a daily practice schedule. Now, I set aside time each day for different activities: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Each day has a small focus, and I follow it consistently. Over time, this structure helped me make progress without feeling overwhelmed. For instance, in the morning, I would dedicate 10 minutes to listening. I'd listen to a podcast or an audiobook in English. Sometimes I would choose something I was really interested in, like tech or sports, so it would keep me motivated. Other days, I would listen to a short story or a news clip. The key was to stay consistent, even if it was just for a short time. After that, I would spend some time speaking. This was a tough one for me at first because I was afraid of making mistakes. But here's the thing. I realized that no one's perfect. Speaking is about practice, not perfection. So I would talk to myself in English, or I would use language learning apps to have short conversations. I also tried recording myself speaking and listening to it to check my pronunciation. It was a little awkward at first, but the more I did it, the more comfortable I became. Slowly, my confidence started to grow. Reading came next. At the beginning, I was overwhelmed by all the vocabulary I didn't know. But the more I read, the more I got used to seeing the words and understanding their meanings. I started with short articles, even social media posts, or simple books. And every time I came across a new word, I didn't panic. I just highlighted it, wrote it down, and used it in my own sentences later on. This daily habit really made a difference in expanding my vocabulary. Then, at the end of the day, I would focus on writing. I would try to write a paragraph or two, just a simple description of my day or my thoughts. Writing every day helped me practice the new words and phrases I had learned, and it gave me a chance to see how much progress I had made. Sometimes I would share my writing with a friend or teacher, and their feedback helped me improve. It wasn't about writing perfect sentences. It was about building the habit and reinforcing everything I had learned throughout the day. Another thing I learned was the power of repetition. This is a big one for me. You know how we sometimes think that learning a new word or phrase once is enough? Well, I used to think that too, but I quickly realized it wasn't. When I started to repeat new words and phrases every day, it made such a difference. I would write them in my notebook, speak them out loud, and listen for them when watching movies or listening to podcasts. The more I repeated the words, the more natural they became, and the faster I could use them when speaking. It wasn't always easy, and there were definitely days when I felt like I wasn't improving. But I always reminded myself that small steps lead to big results. It wasn't about doing everything perfectly, but about showing up every day. On some days, I would feel too tired or too busy, but I made it a point to still do something, even if it was just listening to a podcast while I was cooking or reviewing my vocabulary list. It's these small, consistent actions that add up over time and help you make progress. And let me tell you, it works. I didn't notice dramatic changes overnight, but over weeks and months, the improvements were clear. I started speaking more confidently, understanding native speakers more easily, and even thinking in English without needing to translate everything in my head. All of this came from making daily practice a priority. Now I know that not everyone has the same schedule, so what I suggest is to find what works best for you. If you only have 10 minutes in the morning, that's fine. Use those 10 minutes to listen or read. If you have more time in the evening, focus on speaking and writing. The key is consistency. It's better to practice every day for a short time than to try to do a lot in one day and then skip days. You'll notice that even small daily practices make a huge difference in the long run. Another tip that really helped me stay motivated was setting goals. Every week, I would set a small goal for myself, like learning 10 new words or reading a certain number of pages in a book. These goals kept me on track and gave me a sense of achievement as I reached them. I also rewarded myself when I reached a goal, which helped keep the process enjoyable. And it's important to keep your goals realistic. I started with smaller goals and worked my way up as I got more comfortable with the language. I remember when I started setting those daily practice routines and goals, I felt like I was building a new habit that was really going to stick. And it did. What started as a 15-minute practice became a 30-minute or even an hour-long routine. It became a part of my day that I actually look forward to, and that made all the difference. So, if you want to improve your English, start with small steps and stay consistent. Create a routine that works for you and make practice a daily habit. Over time, you'll be amazed at how much progress you can make with just a little effort every day. Believe me, it adds up. Chapter 6. Consistency is key. Staying motivated on your journey. When I first started learning English, I'll admit I was super excited. I thought, yes, I can do this. But like most things in life, the initial excitement soon faded, and I hit a few bumps along the way. It's normal. At times, staying motivated can be one of the toughest parts of the journey. You might start feeling like, I've been practicing for weeks, but I'm not getting any better. And trust me, I've been there too. But here's the thing. The key to becoming fluent in English, or in any skill really, is consistency. Even when things feel like they're not progressing, it's the small, consistent steps that make a huge difference. I remember hitting a slump around 3 months into my learning journey. Everything seemed harder. Speaking felt awkward. I wasn't retaining vocabulary as quickly, and listening to native speakers made my head spin. I was frustrated, and I questioned whether this was worth all the effort. But something clicked inside me, and I decided to stick with it. That's when I realized that the most important thing wasn't perfection. It was showing up, day after day. So, let me share some of what I've learned about staying motivated throughout this process. When you're learning a language or doing anything challenging, it can feel like you're not making progress. But if you look at your progress over time, you'll see the difference. It's kind of like working out. When you first start going to the gym, you don't immediately see a six-pack, right? But after weeks, months, and even years of consistent effort, you can look back and realize how far you've come. Learning English is exactly the same. The results won't show up overnight, but if you keep putting in the work, they will come. For me, I found that breaking down the bigger goal into smaller, more achievable ones helped keep me on track. At the start, I set a goal to simply practice for 10 minutes a day. It was something so small, but it was realistic and doable. This way, I wasn't overwhelming myself. I wasn't saying, I'm going to master English this week. No, I said, I'm going to practice every day for 10 minutes. This was a simple goal that I could hit consistently, and as time went on, those 10 minutes started to feel more like a habit than a chore. Eventually, I increased the time because it started to feel natural. In the beginning, I was really focused on seeing results right away. I wanted to speak fluently and understand everything instantly. But I learned that those quick results don't happen in the beginning stages of learning. And that's okay. It's more about laying a solid foundation that will allow you to build on top of it as you go. What I started doing was tracking my progress. I'd look back at how much vocabulary I had learned, how much more I understood when listening to podcasts or watching TV shows in English, and how my speaking had improved, even if it was just a little bit. This helped me stay motivated because it reminded me that I was, in fact, making progress. Just slowly. One thing I did to keep the motivation high was mix up my routine. At first, I was doing mostly grammar exercises, but I realized that wasn't as fun and I was getting bored. So, I added more variety. I started reading books, watching movies, and even listening to music in English. I did all of this with the mindset that I was learning, not just consuming entertainment. This made my practice feel less like work and more like something enjoyable. I would take notes on new words I heard in songs, or if there was an interesting phrase in a movie, I would pause it and repeat it out loud. These little moments kept me engaged and helped me feel like I was learning while still enjoying my favorite activities. Another thing that really helped me stay motivated was reminding myself of my why. Why did I want to learn English in the first place? I would think about the opportunities that could come with speaking English fluently. Maybe I would be able to travel to new countries and communicate easily, or perhaps I could get a better job or meet people from all over the world. Every time I reminded myself of my reasons for learning English, it reignited my passion for it. My why kept me moving forward, even when things got tough. But here's a little secret that I discovered about staying motivated. The key isn't just about pushing yourself. It's also about making learning fun. You don't have to sit at a desk all day doing grammar drills. You can find ways to integrate English into your life. Maybe you watch YouTube videos in English about topics you love, or you play games in English. Maybe you follow social media accounts in English and comment on posts. Whatever works for you, make learning English part of your everyday life, and that will make it feel less like an obligation and more like something you actually enjoy doing. I also began to celebrate my small wins. When I could have a short conversation in English, I'd celebrate it. When I understood a podcast episode without pausing, I'd give myself a mental high five. Recognizing these small milestones helped me see that I was improving, even when it didn't feel like it. I would even reward myself with something special after hitting a goal. Whether it was taking a break or treating myself to something I enjoyed, it helped me feel like I was earning the rewards of my hard work. One of the most powerful tools I used to stay motivated was finding a community. I joined English learning groups on social media and even found a language exchange partner. This community provided me with encouragement when I fell down and allowed me to share my challenges and victories with others. The support of people who were going through the same thing made me feel like I wasn't alone in this journey. We would celebrate each other's successes and offer advice when someone was struggling. This gave me the strength to keep going, even when I had doubts. And let's be honest, there were days when I just didn't feel like practicing. But the trick I learned is to show up anyway. Even if I didn't feel like it, I would still dedicate at least a few minutes to practicing English. Sometimes it was just listening to a podcast or maybe reading an article. But I would do something. And eventually, those days when I didn't feel like practicing would turn into moments of progress. I would realize that even the smallest effort counts. It wasn't about doing everything perfectly every single day, but about keeping that consistency going. Over time, I began to see that the more consistent I was, the more motivated I became. And that's the paradox. Consistency breeds motivation. When you see small changes and improvements happening, it makes you want to keep going. When you don't give up, even when it feels like nothing is happening, that's when the magic starts to happen. So, how can you stay motivated? You need to remind yourself why you're doing this. Find ways to make learning fun, celebrate the small wins, and be part of a community that supports you. And, most importantly, you need to be consistent. Even when it feels tough or when you feel like you're not making progress, just keep showing up. One day, you'll look back and realize how far you've come. And trust me, that moment is worth the effort. As we come to the end of this ultimate guide to mastering English fluency, I want you to take a moment and think about the journey ahead. Learning English is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's all about taking small steps every single day, making listening a part of your life, changing your mindset, speaking with confidence, reading to expand your vocabulary, practicing consistently, and staying motivated. Each chapter we've covered is a building block, and with consistency, the fluency you're working towards will become a reality. Remember, you've already taken the first step by being here, by committing to improve, and now it's all about maintaining that momentum. Every effort you make, no matter how small, is getting you closer to your goal. If you enjoyed this guide and want to continue on your English learning journey, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We'll continue to bring you valuable tips, stories, and lessons that will help you improve your skills and keep you motivated every step of the way. So, don't miss out. Stay tuned for more content that will help you become the fluent English speaker you've always dreamed of. Subscribe, stay motivated, and let's keep learning together.